Hello and welcome to Stampscapes. I'm going to create a piece in the memories of Maine. We're going to start off here with the Autumn Bank right. And I'm going to color it with multiple tones. Let's see, I need a little bit of re-inker on my black. I didn't realize I hadn't been using this for a while. We've been doing so many other types of techniques. I've been using a lot of hybrid. But on this one, I want to use a lot of my alcohol inks and other colors on it. Now this one, I usually stamp it in black and just color in different areas in this, but I want to give it multiple tones in here, so we'll use a little bit of green for the forest floor area, and then we'll move into some browns and reds in the canopy of deciduous trees. I don't know if I'm not going for real definitive transitions of color in here. I just want a little bit of tone, just to kind of give myself a little bit of a head start in the coloring process here, so that it's not just this monotone foundation. But it'll be mostly just be different, hopefully different kind of values of black. Because I used it as a foundation. Okay, I'm stamping this pretty high up here because I have a few other colors to come underneath it that we're going to build up. So I especially need room right down in this area. So I'm going pretty high here. So this is almost touching, or actually going off of the paper. I'm not quite sure. Either way would be fine. This is, I'm stamping on a piece of semi-gloss cardstock. Okay, so hopefully you can see the greenish tinges in here, reddish tinges right around here. Okay, so it's darker than if I had just merely stamped this out, just with coloring with these colors. So you use that base coat of black as a foundation. Okay, clearing some space around my desk here. All right, now one of the things that I haven't really done too much of, I don't remember doing this at least, is I don't remember using this seaside cove in here, but I want to do a shoreline in here. And I also want this character right in here with the dog. So I think I'm going to have to stamp this one first and mask it off, and then stamp the other imagery over the top of it with a masked out impression of this. I might actually mask this one out. This one's going to be I normally don't do a lot of masking, but this one's going to be I don't know, whatever important piece for me here to do. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do, I'll take this and I'll just stamp it out again right here, and I'll just take that and I'm going to cut that out and place that right out over the top. You've seen it here for the first time, me cutting out something and masking something out, an actual image. I'll pause the video here and get that taken care of. All right, this is my cutout right here. It's not perfect because I don't want it to be cut right out to the edge, because inevitably when you do that, and if you put this right over the top like that. If it goes right to the edge, then you get this halo around it. Now, I'll probably end up with some haloing anyway. Okay, it's inevitable. But we're going to be doing so much coloring, it'll fill in that area. I just don't want like a 1/8 of an inch of a white space around my figures there. You know, like a really large, you know, kind of white halo, you know, where the paper is just, even though it's a thin piece of just cheap copy paper, it, you know, it's enough of a, whatever, height change that it, you know, affects the impression quality around that said mask. Okay, so let's see right here. Let's go up right here. Okay, now this has a straight edge right up here. I'm going to really blot that off as much as I can. Okay, you can even use a wet paper towel, but I'll just use a dry one. Just because I don't really have, this isn't the horizon, this is a horizon up here. And for here, you know, that's not the horizon, it's just the edge of our Autumn Cove. Okay, now right here in this corner, I need to wipe this off too. I'm going to use mostly this side over, okay? Go like this. So it's like someone's sitting on, like the beach. Okay. And see no, you know, halo around those figures like that. And then that transitions up just like that without having this hard line right in there. And then let's go for one more usage of the mask like this. And I'm going to put them sitting on this rock right here. So that's those two kind of enjoying the scenery like that. Boulders with lichens, boulders with lichen. It's the larger version. There's boulders with lichen small as well. And those two little figures are off of this nature set right here. All right. Now we're going to allow this to dry a little bit. That is really moist up there because I use the Marvy pens. This is also a little bit moist, and I want to get a little bit of drying time in here. But before I do that, let's create a little bit of a shoreline here as well. And again, if I didn't mention it, I'm using dye-based inks here because I plan on using a pretty decent amount of alcohol pens to do a lot of the coloring here. I want to create a pretty intense color scheme in here, and then I'm going to have these light beams coming through here. So let's get this dried, and we'll start on the coloring process. All right, we're dry. And these are some of the colors that I'll be roughly starting off with. I'll probably start with the colored pencils just because they're a little bit of a softer, lighter style of application. And then I'll move into these tones in here. So kind of fall colors and green in here. And then I'm not sure what I'll do with this rock right here. Sandy type of thing right in here, and blue waters right in here. And some of those reflections in the water will be the same colors as the above imagery. All right, so what I usually do is I usually start with my lighter tones and then I work incrementally into the darker ones within each area. So with something like the fall tones, you know, and those fall colors, it would go along with something like this, you know, in this order right here. But I mean, it's not like a rule hard and fast. I might go light to dark, then it's like I might need some lighter tones again or something like that. And then I'll go back to them. Okay, now this area underneath here is going to be basically green, but I'm using yellow as a foundation just so that we have continuity between the green grassy area and the trees. There's not just a completely different color scheme in the different areas. Okay, so we want kind of harmony. Okay, so that being said, like even down here, okay, so I said I was going to do some of this reflection, color reflection down here as well. So we'll add that down here. But even this yellow, I think I'm going to use it as a base coat color in the sand, just to give that sand a little bit of a warmer tinge. And see this dog here, I might even bring some of that into them, even though they're not going to be like a yellow lab or something. It could be. I want some of that tone in there, and even on this rock. So it doesn't have to be yellow. I mean, like a tan or something like that would be a good one. Or if you have a brown tone or something of that sort. Any kind of light tone like that. It's kind of a good base coat to apply into your pieces. Again, it's for continuity. I mean, you can do that with multiple colors as well. All right, let me address some of this as well. The bluish tinges in here. I mean, you can do it. You can approach this any way you want. You can kind of work an area a little bit more before just doing, or you can do it like a general lighter tone application in your various areas and objects. See right here in these waves, you leave the little kind of white cappy area a little bit lighter, or you just avoid them altogether and you're coloring the areas, darker areas within the design. Now up here, you're saying, well, where do you color up there? I'm just going to do some streaks coming from the outside here into that area, and I'm going to leave this area kind of light, like light is hitting the water. We'll bring in some of this blue into the sandy area, which is also yellow, so it's giving me more of a aqua, greenish tinge. Here we'll come into our rock again. I don't necessarily want my rock green or blue or something like that, but again, it's just kind of reading as a base coat. Yellow and blue, are the two components for green, so we can add some of that in here. All right, let's keep with the blues here. I'm going with a little bit of a darker blue now, and we're hitting that again in our darker areas, such as underneath the crest of the wave, the lip of the wave, as they call it. These are tiny waves, of course, but, little waves nonetheless. Okay, and then we'll hit the same areas of the rocks. In other words, the darker areas of the rocks. Kind of in the shadows like that. Everything, it starts giving things a little bit of a more rounded look, more three-dimensional look. Okay, and here's a darker kind of navy blue. Kind of you start being a little bit more selective with your placement of the darker tones. You know, you get a lot more coverage with the lighter tones because it's kind of like a broader application of that hue in a given area. And the darker areas just, the darker colors, you know, you just kind of address, you know, the darker areas, shadow areas, shadows being cast by, you know, the objects. Okay, let's give the characters here, speaking of shadows, let's give them a little bit more, let's have them cast their shadow on these rocks right here. See, I'm kind of making it darker right there. Now it looks like they're sitting on the rock. It anchors them to the rock by adding that shadow. Like so, let's move back up into our tree area. I'll apply a little bit of a brighter tone of yellow. Before, I use the yellow as more as like a base coat. Let's move up into our other stronger ranges of reds and oranges, but I'll move to the oranges first. Now, if I was just doing colored pencils, I would probably be a little bit more, kind of selective in terms of my placement of this. I would retain a little bit more light, but I'm going to be putting light back into those objects, you know, the tree branches specifically, with the use of acrylic paint pens. So I'm going to be toning out or coloring out some of the branches in here completely. Again, where I would normally leave a little bit more light in there, but the acrylic paint pens are going to add that pop of light back into there. All right, that was one orange. I'm moving up to, you know, these darker oranges here. I think this one's not going to be dark enough, so let's just move into this one. Right, like something like that. Let's see if I can get a little bit more of a, like a crimson red into that. Yeah. I'm starting to get quite a thick buildup of, you know, waxy colored pencil on here. So on this semi-gloss cardstock, it's not a terribly textured paper, but if you're using colored pencils that are soft enough, they will kind of layer pretty good. But even, you know, even a really soft colored pencil, you start to build up too thick of an application, and then you're just going wax into wax, and it really doesn't apply very well. But these ones seem to be doing pretty good. So it just depends on your paper and pencil. I don't know, whatever, softness, density, whatever you would call it. And again, this is, it's kind of looking a little bit dark, but again, the acrylic paint pens are, a real important part of my process, with leaves like that. I like to have, kind of the, when I think about fall tones, it's about this kind of shimmering light, that's kind of twinkly, and that's where the paint pens come into play. Okay, adding a little bit of green on tops of these rocks right here for that kind of mossy looking lichen colored look right in here. And let's start moving into some brown tones here. I don't think about Maine. I don't think about like a, like a sandy beach or anything like that. But let's just add this in for a little bit of extra kind of variation of color. I'll get some of this into this rock as well to give it more of an earthy toned base. We have another variation of brown. And we'll get a little bit of that earthy tone into our grasses right in here. See, that kind of gives it that warm tinge right in there. And we'll add a little bit of this brown along the shoreline right here. I like to leave it a little bit light like that as a separation from the water still, but we'll get a little bit of that tinge of that in there. And I think I'm going to go back to my blue here, looking at this. Get a little bit more of that tone in here. About like so. We've got a lot of color on here. I don't know. We don't need to be using too much alcohol inks. But the alcohol inks do make things a little bit brighter. We'll give our dog a little bit of color. And our figure, woman's arm right here. And I'll give her hair a little bit of tone. About like so. Okay. And let's see, let's warm things up a little bit here. A little bit more of a kind of a warmer reflected light within the forms. All right, let's go with pink. Now you think pink, we have all these colors up here, but remember pink is a lighter value of red. So you can add this on. It's, being used as like somewhat of a base coat idea because these are just transparent colors. So, the colors underneath will always show through. All right, here's a little bit of yellow. And again, I'm just basically trying to brighten things up a little bit. Additionally, with alcohol right over the wax right in here. Now, when I say brighten up, I don't mean lighten up. It's probably going to be a little bit darker. Brighter is about intensity, not value, light and dark. It's about bright and dull. So you can see this right throughout here. It's a little bit more intense now with a layer of this yellow. In our water, we'll just brighten it up a little bit. This is a dull blue, but over a dull blue colored pencil, it's a little bit different. A little bit more intense. Ever so slightly. Again, this is not a really bright blue that I'm working with right here. All right, here's a little bit of a darker blue. It's not tremendous. No, that blue is like all whipped. Let me see if I have a little bit of a brighter blue in another pack. All right, shuttle art. Alcohol pen. And again, I'm hitting the shadow areas underneath the crest of the wave. So it's just kind of modeling the forms and shadows a little bit, more in this case, with a little bit more intensity. All right. I think we've achieved a pretty decent amount of kind of variation, light and dark. There's a little bit of brown. We'll anchor this rock down a little bit more. I like that. How about adding a little bit more shadow into the dog? The dog's shadow areas, I'm kind of leaving the lighter areas of the dog as is. How about in the shadows within the grassy tufts? That. Now, I think for the sky area, I'm just going to approach it pretty minimally up here, okay? But where it's just kind of that open space, I want to just cap that off a little bit. Let's go with just a little bit of blue right here. And just a piece of paper towel. And we'll add a little bit of a tone right in here. We'll go kind of in the corner down here too. Yeah, go 4 corners. But you can see where that kind of, you know, framed off that area. There's a little bit more of like a horizon glow. And let's hit a little bit down here. I'm using a little bit more of this blue than I thought I would. All right. Yeah, something like that. All right. Let me get set up here for my next process, which will be the acrylic paint pens. All right, a selection of acrylic paint pens here, mostly kind of in the pastel range of tones. And let me see here, I could probably use like a red maybe. Red gets pretty intense, but we can use it up in that tree. All right, I'm going to work from darker to lighter. Now, this one's not a pastel, that would be a pink. But for this purpose of intense Maine fall tone, we want to use a little bit of this as kind of a base. Now, the reason why I work with lighter tones to darker tones in the transparent colors or things like colored pencils, it's because, again, they're more of like a transparent color, even though colored pencils aren't necessarily transparent like, you know, dye-based inks or something like that. They're still kind of see-through when you apply it. Unless you really build them up, okay? But these are more opaque, so I can have this kind of darker background and a lighter, you know, application of color on top. All right, and I'll put a little bit of this down here in the reflection. I really want this surface to kind of shimmer. You know, in appearance. All right, now that's going to be a little bit wet on there as I'm applying the next color. You know, I think this orange right here, that's kind of a little bit duller. Let's go brighter. You want to really shake up your pens before usage so that you get a lot of that pigment and binder mixed really well. Binder being for acrylic is water. All right, we have that. I've kind of built it up in areas roughly where the red went, but I want some of the red to show, so it was a little bit above. See, the red is like down here and the orange is up top. Kind of, you know, it's... if this is like a tuft of foliage, I have a lot of the red kind of like down here, like about like so, and then you go up here to the next area, and underneath each one of these little tufts is kind of this shaded area, and then the orange transitions. It goes in here like in some of that red, but then it goes a little bit higher up. Now this is all being done in a very small space. It's like a 1/4 inch or something like that, but that's kind of roughly the process. And then the yellow might be up top here, but it transitions a little bit into the, you know, from the orange, okay, like that. So you get these areas that are on the top will be nice and light. And then when I use white, it'll be kind of on this upper side of the areas within the object. Okay, so I mean, it's not exactly, you know, because, you know, you get all these little forms in here that aren't super defined, and that's, you know, because that's not how it is in nature, so that's how I've drawn them, but that's roughly kind of my concept right here with the pens. All right, now this yellow isn't applying very well because this is really wet in here, so I'm applying like a wet dot into a wet area, or a semi-wet area. Let me see if I get a newer one of these that just has more paint. Let me see if this one's flowing a little bit better. Okay, this is good. Now this paint, wet acrylic into wet acrylic, it's going to go on looking a little bit different because what it does is it sits there and it, you know, it takes a few minutes to dry, and in the meantime it starts to merge with the wet acrylic underneath it, so it's not going to be quite as light and yellow. Sometimes it's good because it kind of blends a little bit more because it's physically mixing. But yeah, you could heat set it a little bit more, and, you know, when you lay a dot down, you'll have a kind of a better idea of how it's going to look when it's dry. But I don't know. I usually don't dry the piece. Sometimes if if it really changes drastically, I will, or I'll just let it dry and I'll add another layer of acrylic over the top of it. Okay, so adding in some of this down here underneath, kind of bringing the the floor area a little bit to life and making it a little bit more sparkly down below. Look about like so. All right, now let's see. I don't think I need that green. I don't know if I used it in there or not. Let's go to white. White, you know, in theory should have the highest amount of contrast. I want to make my wet kind of shoreline gravel sparkle and shimmer in the sunlight. So we're adding this down. I'll add more in the lighter area, and then when it moves out into the darker area, I spread out these dots a little bit so you can see it's a little bit lighter here, and it, you know, spread out over here a little bit more. I mean, the whole area it's not too dark anyway, so it doesn't matter huge amount, but you can still kind of follow that convention. Tops of these rocks, we'll make them a little bit lighter. Get a little bit of texture, sparkly lighting. And then on the crest of the waves, especially if you accidentally colored some of them in a little bit too much, you can go back in and just kind of reclaim it. Or you can reclaim it in a different texture with dots or something. Put little white caps back into them. And then, where there's some splashing waves along these rocks, you can add some extra splashes, like so. Or these rocks up here, let's give them a little bit more dimension by adding this highlight on top of them, like so. And then let's bring in a little bit more contrast into here on the tops of these tufts of grass. There's some rocks over here too. I'll put a little highlight on top of them. Shoreline, wrapping around right here. All right, so you got that lighting in those trees like that. All right, now I almost forgot. This is what I like to do. There's these tree trunks in here, and I can kind of just barely see them. But on one side of the tree trunk, I do have this lighting in there. I have them lit in a certain way. Now, some of the trunks in here I can't see at all. But what I'll do is I'll just go and kind of fake it, and I'll put these little trunk, whatever, definition highlights into them. And some I'm just kind of creating it where it doesn't really exist. But you have these trunks in here, so you can see it kind of stands out a little bit more. There's more kind of stability to the trees with that in there. And it kind of defined some areas in here. It was like overall kind of a little bit murkier. All right, we're gonna allow this to dry a little bit, or I'll heat set it. Maybe I'll just heat set it real fast right here. The acrylic dries reasonably quick, but we've layered. We put on so many different layers of ink on there, so it was probably built up a little bit in some areas. Cotton ball with some white pigment ink. Doesn't have to be the Brilliance one. Could be any brand of pigment ink. And we'll add in our atmosphere in here. So the most distant trees right in here. Here's an opportunity right in here where it's lighter. I can put some tone right back in here and lighten up those trees like that. What you might do is sometimes you're applying this wet media into dye-based inks. So you might spray seal this first if you're kind of worried about that. Like I'm getting a little bit of that red right over here by tapping down in red, it kind of going back into solution. So I might add a little bit of spray sealant to this, actually, before adding too much of this in this area right in here, especially, I think. Or let me see if I can do it here. Okay, I want a little bit of this foggy kind of mist within my trees like that. See that atmosphere it gives? Like that. I'm looking on here. There's a little bit of green right there, if you can see it. Adding this right along the shoreline right here. kind of want to make it look pretty atmospheric here. All right, now I'm going to spray seal this because I'm going to have some light beams coming into here. And I definitely don't want to be, have light beams kind of, picking up all that color and just, doing these blotches of color across here. So I'll use some Krylon spray fixative on this. All right, I've spray sealed this. I don't know if you can tell, but sometimes it brings out a little bit of an extra intensity, especially if you've done a lot of layering of colors. But it also gives it a little bit of a uniform look to it by applying that right over the top of it. All right, so I'm going to have some light beams coming in here like this, and it'll be coming from, well, let's just pick an area on the horizon maybe, like maybe that red tree right there, or something like that. And yeah, maybe I'll have a little bit higher. I'll have it kind of coming from right up here. And let's do... I might change my mind. I might go high. There's a little bit of this red dot right there. Do you see that? That might be my source of light. And we'll have it coming in like this. We call these crepuscular rays. I want some of these rays to be a little bit subtle, and some to be a little bit kind of more distinct. And I start it in the lighter area, and then I apply it like so. I'm just applying a very light application. And then where it starts getting wide, I tend to kind of peter it out a little bit, or I might apply more on the top edge or side of the beam. Yeah, let's go down a little bit here. I'll kind of peter it out down here. And maybe we'll go quite a bit heavier right at this, the source of, not quite the point of emanation, but, a little bit more. I'll take a look at it like that. See that how it's a little bit thicker with the white paint, and then down here it kind of dissipates. All right. Now, I mean, I could go a little bit more, that maybe it dissipates too much, so where it's going over the lighter area, you can't see it at all. So, you just adjust accordingly. Let's go a little bit more. I was a little bit conservative, but hey, you can always go lighter. But if you go really light, I mean, you can kind of wipe some of it off, but if you don't have to wipe it off, then all the better. Okay, we'll make another beam right over here. I'll change the thickness of it again for variation. Sometimes you go a little bit thicker with the white paint and more opaque, and then you kind of skip an area and leave that as is. Sometimes it looks a little more realistic because you get these things in, that are breaking up the beam, like in this case trees, like it's coming through the trees or something. Okay, see this right here? You can kind of see these little darker areas, and that's where you'd stand to see the beam a little bit stronger because there's more contrast in the back of it. And then right down here on these rocks, I'll apply it to some of these rocks like that. Okay, and we have something like that. So say these beams don't have to be like super, super, you know, powerful. It can just be kind of subtle and, I don't know, whatever, a little bit more serene than extreme, maybe you could say. Okay, let's go like this. Let's go about like this right here. Where it's going right on top of the to the figures, but then I'll just have a little bit on her like that. Kind of like so. I'm picking up a little bit of that green right there. And then let's go to the left of our figures. About like that. So you have about 4 beams working. This one's real subtle right here, but it's because it's so light in there you can't really see too much. But let's go with another beam coming across here, maybe. Why don't I do this? I'll have it coming through here. It's going behind these trees, and then it's coming out from back of that tree right there. All right, something like that. I like this beam right here, that original one. Let's strengthen that. Oh, by the way, so when you apply this white, it's going to look lighter, usually, after you apply it, and then as it dries, it gets a little bit more transparent looking. And it darkens up. So that is not going to be that light. It'll kind of darken up a little bit. Yeah, or it'll become a little bit more transparent. It doesn't just become like a darker beam or something like that. It gets a little bit more see-through. Okay, now around these trees, I'm going to kind of bring a little bit more lighting into them, just in general. Like that. And adding a kind of a softer essence back up in here. Now that I see the lighting in here, I want to, and that really super soft light, I want to kind of soften up some of these other areas. It's real subtle. It's like these areas right here, the tops of those tree, the reflections. And we get something like that. And we have our lighting in there. I'm going to frame this up, mat it, probably put some sort of word stamp around here or somewhere in here. And then we'll take a look and see what that looks like. We're going to let this air dry here for a little bit. and see what it looks like, mostly in terms of the light beams. All right, we have it formatted, the piece formatted with a little bit of a white border around it, really tiny, 1/16 of an inch or something like that, and then silver like that. And I'm going to stamp this piece right up here in the corner. If it doesn't look good directly on there, I'm going to stamp it on a separate piece of paper, kind of mat it, frame it, and then put it up there. But I thought I would give this a try just as is because, I don't know, there seems to be enough space there, so. And I'm stamping it in StazOn because there's a lot of sealant, workable fixative on it, so using something like a water-based media wouldn't be very good. All right. That E gets a little bit obscured in there, so I might go on a separate piece of paper. And we'll see which looks the best. You know, my inclination was to go with a little bit of a more of a, you know, white piece of paper, matted. It might look a little bit more complete that way and elegant. Just go like that. Cut that out, and then I would put a little bit of a silver border around it, and then put it up there like that. So let's see what that might look like as far as the difference goes. All right, we have our little piece stamped out and then framed in about a same thickness of border as the white right here around the whole piece. P-I-E-C-E, the whole piece. And then we have piece right here. And, you know, I could make some of these beams a little bit lighter, but I think I'm going to be putting in some little additional kind of light flares in here, like this. Lens flares, I should say, not light flares. Kind of illuminate a little bit more some of those tree trunks. The tree trunks really kind of darkened up after spray sealing. So you can see we've kind of revealed some of them a little bit more, especially with the strength of light beams coming through there. And then sometimes in the beam, although this beam is supposed to be much closer to us, but you can kind of illuminate some of the things in the path of the beam, or the things that are pretty close to it. All right, and then back to our white pigment ink. And I'm just going to create these little kind of orbs of light, kind of dancing around our figures here, little subjects here. We go like so. We want to really give these two figures a really spectacular light show. And so you see this little glowing little orbs in here like that. We'll go a little bit more extreme with a little bit more contrast. Then you can also make some of these waves a little bit misty and I don't know, illuminated. All right, there you go. Brightest colors. Memories of Maine. Thanks for watching. Hope you liked the card.